It's the morning after the first round of the NFL draft, and the Steelers got their guy in Broderick Jones for a trade. But was it the right trade value? And what have they set themselves up with the 32nd overall pick with who's left? I'm Chris Carter, host of the North Shore Drive podcast here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're joined by Ray Fittipaldo, who was in the Steelers facility all night long, breaking things down and keeping an eye on how things played out. We'll get both of our reactions and analysis on that pick and what's ahead for the Steelers and the rest of the NFL draft. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Here joined by Ray Fittipaldo, one of our esteemed Steelers beat writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're both at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com to get all of our written work and check out all of our great content there. If you enjoy this show and you want more things like it, subscribe to this podcasting platform on any podcasting app. We have all the sorts of podcasting platforms, and especially on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel for the Monday, Wednesday, and Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as all the daily content that comes out for us, including our live stream covering the NFL draft that Adam Bitter did a great job running last night as we were all jumping in and out and doing and being busy. And that was, of course, sponsored by the Acrisure Fan Advantage, which is giving you all the best coverage that you can get from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on your Pittsburgh Steelers. Check out the live stream tonight, again, as Adam Bittner is going to lead us through the many hours of day two of the NFL draft, where the Steelers currently have 3 picks between the second and third rounds. You'll get our opinions on where they go there. But Ray, let's jump right to Broderick Jones. Yep. This was one of the top offensive tackles that we talked about. This was the guy that we were thinking, maybe if they could get him, this would be a win. Was this a win in your eyes that they did land him, even though Paris Johnson Jr., Peter Skoronski, and Darnell Wright all went ahead of him, and they had to trade away a 4th-round pick to go up and get him?
Yeah, I think first off, all the draft analysts were right. Those tackles were going to come off in the top half of the first round, and the Steelers were going to have to make a move to get one of them. The hype on Darnell Wright was real. He goes before Peter Skoronski and Broderick Jones. But I think when you look at Broderick Jones, and let's first talk about the compensation. All you got to give up is pick 120 and swap first-round picks. I mean, I think that's
great value.
I mean, Omar Khan's batting 1,000 on trades. We'll discount that William Jackson one, which was basically them just taking him on for the Commanders. He's done terrific so far. We'll see what he does with pick 32. I think with Jones, athletically, size-wise, he's your prototypical left tackle. Now, there's some work to do. He's got a few things, fundamentally to take care of before I think he could be a starter. But I do think he's going to be a starter as a rookie at some point. And I think it's, if not a home run pick for the Steelers, it's pretty darn close. It just might be a stand-up triple.
A stand-up triple. I feel you on that. I feel the same way. Broderick Jones, yeah, sure, needs to polish where he puts his hands when he's blocking. His fundamentals aren't all the way there. He's a little inexperienced at the offensive line. But you know what? This guy is a mauler already. He wants to crush people. And one thing I've been saying all night long, I think that he fits the typical Tomlin saying, I'd rather say woe than sick 'em, because Mike Tomlin wants guys who he doesn't have to motivate to go crush somebody. He wants guys that go and do it, and that the most that he has to do is say, hey, young boy, let's bring it back a little bit. Let's refine our skills here, and then you go out and get him. And that's who I think Broderick Jones is. I think that his athletic profile is awesome. He seems very coachable from the notes that were given by Kirby Smart about him. And again, in my opinion, he was my top offensive tackle that I ranked in this class. Now, I'm not an NFL scout. I'm not a front office guy. I don't have the access that these guys do. So, maybe that's why he was the 4th offensive tackle off the board. But I think that he could be a pillar player for the future of this Steelers offensive line and what they're trying to do, not just to protect Kenny Pickett, but also to plow the road and give space for Najee Harris and open up this run game. In your mind, Ray, does Broderick Jones, we know Mike Tomlin, he's not just going to hand him the starting job. He's going to have to win it. But do you think Broderick Jones would win the left tackle spot off of Dan Moore Jr. and force the the Steelers to consider him either as a backup or have him compete with Chukwuekorfor for?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to happen at some point during 2023, Chris. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Broderick Jones is going to be a day one starter. We got to see, what he looks like. I mean, it's
right.
Here's a guy, redshirt sophomore, 21 years old, again, fitting the Tomlin Steelers profile. Get him young, coach him up, and teach him how to be a pro. So there are some things to work out. But I do think when you look at his footwork and the way he tested, I don't think there's going to be any issues. What you talked about with hand placement, that's why they have coaches.
Yep.
I think Pat Meyer proved last year with some, mediocre to decent players that he can get the most out of them, and he did that. Now you add Isaac Seumalo to the mix. You add Broderick Jones to the mix on the left side. We'll see what they do in day two. They've had interest in interior guys, centers throughout this process who are still there. John Michael Schmidt, Steve Avila, still on the board here in round two as we get set to enter Friday night. So we'll see what they do there. But if you have that pair on the left side, and let's say they do nothing else, you got Mason Cole, James Daniels, and Chukwuekorfor, I think that's a much improved offensive line over what they had last season.
I agree. We'll get to the remaining centers that are out there as well as the remaining players out there because I definitely want to get your thoughts on how the heck is Joey Porter Jr. still around. But let's stick on Broderick Jones for a bit longer. Big part of what the Steelers wanted to do was protect Kenny Pickett. He had 2 head injuries this past year that took him out during the season, and they can't afford him to go through that again. They need to protect him, keep him upright, Kevin Dotson at left guard, who I think made progress. He was also the spot that was getting beat on the offensive line that allowed the pressures that eventually got to Kenny Pickett on some of those injuries. And Isaac Seumalo looks like a guy who could take that spot at left guard. At left tackle, Dan Moore Jr., I think across the board, we'd all agree Dan Moore Jr. does a solid job for being a 4th-round pick and growing into his spot, but he's not. He's also a weak spot on the offensive line when it compared to all of the competition, even I think compared to Kevin Dotson. You put Seumalo and you put Broderick Jones in this offensive line in 2023, and you keep Mason Cole. Maybe you add a John Michael Schmitz or a Joe Tippmann. We'll get to those guys later. And then you still have James Daniels. You still have Chukwuekorfor. And then Dan Moore Jr. could be your flex option as well as Kevin Dotson. And you have depth there. And all of a sudden, Omar Khan seems to have flipped the idea of how good this offensive line can be in just a year's time.
Absolutely. And that's what you want, Chris, when you have a team that's built around defense, and we saw the tilt towards the running game last season. I think this was only a natural course to take for Omar Khan on the first day of the draft. We talked about this offensive line class, how there was a drop-off after Broderick Jones to the next guy. I think Anton Harrison went late first round.
Yeah, like 24. I think he went to the Jaguars, right?
Jaguars, yeah, late in the first round. So there was a good 10 to 15 pick gap after the Steelers made that pick. And it's a deep corner class. So I agree with you. I think build this team from the trenches out, which I think we all kind of forecast was what Andy Weidel wanted to do. Mm-hmm. Get that aspect of your team situated first and then branch out. And I think they could afford to do that too, because let's face it, in Kevin Colbert's final years, he concentrated an awful lot on skill position players. Absolutely. Kenny Pickett, Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, George Pickens, Chase Claypool, who was dealt. But, his 5 final picks in the top 2 rounds, they were all on offensive skill position players. So I think this was well overdue. And I think you fortify the lines of scrimmage, give yourself a chance to get better. They were average as a run blocking team last year. They were average as a pass protecting team last year. But now I think you give yourself a chance, provided all these picks and these free agents signings work out, you give yourself a chance to be, I don't know, a top 10, top 12 running team. Cut down on those sacks. Maybe you give up 5 to 7 fewer sacks. I mean, I think this is what Omar Khan and Andy Weidel wanted to do, and I think they're well on their way to doing that.
Absolutely. We're going to go over in the next segment who is still left out there right now for the Steelers to select. So stick with us here, and then we'll also go about how they should handle that with their picks in the later segment. But before we do any of that, I want to talk to you guys about our great sponsors, GameTime. Now, GameTime.co is the website that you need to go to right now if you want to buy tickets for your favorite event without it being stressful. GameTime is an app that you can download right to your phone, or you can go to their website, GameTime.co. And when you do so, you're going to find a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. There's killer deals on this website on last-minute tickets, and they have a best price guarantee, so you can stop stressing over the price of the tickets that you're getting, even if you're getting them at the last minute. The GameTime app allows you to book tickets up to the last minute, even if you didn't plan out far in advance, even if you didn't know that a concert was coming, and you wanted to get these tickets, but you see that they're really expensive on another outlet, but they're not expensive on GameTime, because they give you exclusive flash deals on tickets for things like football games, basketball games, baseball games, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The GameTime guarantee means you'll always get their best price. So if you find tickets in the same section and row for less somewhere else, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, and you can create an account and use the code PITT, all capital letters, all one word, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Or go to their website, GameTime.co, and still create an account there. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code PITT for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo. We're of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ray, let's look at the remaining field here and what's left here. Now, I have a bit of a big board here that I've kind of been keeping track. I ranked like my top 92 players in this draft process just to get myself through the third round, at least what I hope would be available at the third round here. I think everyone's surprised that Joey Porter Jr. is still on the board here at 32. A lot of us, we all projected like maybe Joey Porter Jr. would have been the 17th overall pick if the Steelers have stuck there. But as we saw, Christian Gonzalez fell down quite a ways. He was the 17th overall pick with the Patriots, who traded back to get the Steelers spot there. And then we saw Emmanuel Forbes, Deonte Banks. They came off the board there. So the cornerback draft was a little bit different there. But also, you got players like Brian Branch, the safety out of Alabama, Michael Mayer, the tight end of Notre Dame, and that's ahead of Darnell Washington, who the Steelers both visited with the top brass at his pro day and brought him in for a top 30 visit. You still have the centers, John Michael Schmitz, Joe Tippmann available, and then other guys that they had the top 30 visits, like Julius Brents, the cornerback out of Kansas State, and Keanu Benton, the defensive lineman out of Wisconsin, and someone that you brought up, Ray, an interior offensive lineman, guard Osiris Torrance from Florida. All of them are sitting there. That's a lot of really good prospects who I think grade very well coming into this draft process. Is the move simply just picking Joey Porter Jr. and dealing with the rest later, or do you think the Steelers have some wiggle room here?
I think they will consider trading down, because I think some teams that want to come up and get Will Levis will maybe overpay for that. But let's just talk about the prospects right now.
Yeah, let's talk about the picks, like the process of the picks in the third segment. Yeah. But let's talk about the players in this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me. Why did those corners drop? Gonzalez was, I don't want to say he was a consensus top 10 pick, but I bet you 75% of the draft analysts out there had him going in the top 10. And then Joey Porter Jr., I know he didn't have ball production at Penn State, but he's a prototypical big corner with size, performed well in the Big Ten, had a really good season this past year. So, I'm not sure why that happened. I got to give credit to Peter King. I think he wrote in his column this past week that Porter could slip out of round one, and he did. So
wow.
He's got some pretty good information there. I'm not sure what it is. But now the question is, if you're the Steelers, there are still a lot of big corners on the board. You mentioned Brents. You got Porter. There's a lot of guys with that profile. So if you're the Steelers, would you go Brian Branch, the top slot corner at 32, and then double down at 49 on another one?
I'm right with you, Ray. Go ahead. Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, I mean that's kind of the logical thinking, right? You go ahead, get that versatility, that guy who can play dime linebacker slot, safety at some point for you. And then I don't want to say you settle, but you still have Brents, Stevenson.
Yep.
All these guys you can get 49.
Kelly Ringo's still 80. Out there.
And Kelly, Ringo. So, I don't know how the Steelers like all those guys, but I do think if you want to take Branch at 32, I think one of those guys that we just mentioned would still be there at 49. Now, that doesn't solve edge rusher for you.
Right.
That doesn't solve defensive line for you. So,
right.
Spending 2 picks on defensive backs back-to-back would create some roster issues for you, especially since you did trade 120. But I don't know. That kind of makes sense to me if you grab Branch first and then, I don't want to say settle, but, take advantage of that depth later on and get your corner at 49 too, your outside corner.
No, I feel you on that. And it makes a lot of sense what you're saying there. And even though I have Joey Porter Jr. as a higher rated player than Brian Branch on my big board, but like you said, if you pass on Joey Porter Jr., then he goes before 49. And again, we'll get to whether they should trade and do other things there in the next segment. But let's just focus on if they stayed pat at their picks 32, 49, and 80. If you pass on Joey Porter Jr., you get Brian Branch. You're absolutely right. Joey Porter Jr. maybe the next corner off the board there. So there's at least one corner in the way. Let's say 2 corners still get taken, or even 3 corners get taken before the Steelers pick again at 49. So that would be Joey Porter Jr. on my board, Julius Brents, and then Kelly Ringo. You're still left with Cam Smith, Tyreek Stevenson, and then you could still get other guys that have really good ball skills like Travius Hodgins-Tomlinson, DJ Turner, Clark Phillips III, Garrett Williams. And I think that there you start to flex into maybe wait on those guys, those last couple guys for the third round. But any one of those guys, I think are second round worthy, especially at the middle pick at 49. Whereas at safety, I don't feel the same way. I feel like, when you get to Antonio Johnson, maybe, but I don't think that he brings you the flexibility that Brian Branch does. So I like the idea of bringing in Branch, but like you said, also sticking to the secondary, maybe you don't need to do that because we talked about making this offensive line a top 10 unit. I think a John Michael Schmitz combined with Broderick Jones as a rookie class, bolstered by veterans who they've added in free agency like Samalo and Daniels. I think that has the makings of the next 4 to 5 years of growing into an elite group. And becoming the next great Steelers offensive line. And that's where it's tempting to not pass up on a center if you think that he is the guy right now.
Yeah. So the only issue with that, and believe me, I think it could happen. I don't want to say they've telegraphed it, but they've made no secret about their feelings about John Michael Schmitz or Avila from TCU. But if they do that, do you turn around? Do you maybe flip Mason Cole for a 4th round pick?
Maybe.
Do you try to flip James Daniels for a 3rd or a 4th round pick? I don't know what kind of interest there would be there, but talk about a glut of interior linemen. I'm not saying you don't need both those guys, but I think one of those guys would have to go, right? I mean, you're not only trading the player, you're kind of trading the contract there too, because it wouldn't make sense to be paying starters money to somebody who would be sitting on the bench, especially after you acquire Nate Herbig to be your swing center and your swing guard. So that's the only issue with drafting a guy like John Michael Schmitz or Steve Oliva. But believe me, if they do that, they'll have a plan, and I think they'll turn around and they would trade one of those guys.
Yeah. I feel you on that, and I think that there's a potential there. Let's move to the idea of what they'll do with these picks and how they'll make those picks in the next segment, because like you said, there's still trade options on the board there. The Steelers made a trade up. We were talking about that being a possibility, and even somewhat of a likelihood with how aggressive Omar Khan likes to be. We'll get those thoughts and some of the thoughts that you thought about how Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan responded yesterday in a minute here, right on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Back with us on the North Shore Drive podcast, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, breaking things down for you on how the Steelers draft went. Ray, before we talk about Tomlin and Khan or anything like that, let's look at how this could play out with the picks that they have available to them. Now, you mentioned a trade down as a possibility. At 32, you feel like the Steelers shouldn't pass on a player that they think is their guy, but I know that they got a great price for getting the 14th overall pick for just the 4th round pick at 120. But as it stands, it's still great that they have 3 more picks in the top 80 of this NFL draft class. But if they made no other moves, they would have no day 3 picks until their 2 7th rounders. And that is a huge gap from 80th overall all the way into the 200s in a class that we think can be deep at several positions that the Steelers could address here. I'm kind of with you. And you mentioned earlier, both Will Levis and Hendon Hooker fell to the 2nd round. And there were teams that probably passed on them because they were like, man, we want to get some of these other top talents here. But what are the chances that you think that there are some teams that are calling and could give the Steelers some serious compensation, as in maybe another 2nd round pick, maybe another 3rd round pick, and some change? What is the chances that they're going to entertain and possibly even pull that off right now?
Yeah, so I wrote these down. So excuse me, I'll just read off my phone.
Sure.
How about the Rams?
Ooh.
I think they pick what, 35?
They pick at 36, I think. Yes.
36. Okay. How about the Raiders?
Love it. They passed on Levis. They passed on Levis too. Yeah.
How about the Titans?
They need a quarterback.
How about the Seahawks? And how about the Lions? I mean, I just named you 6 teams. I don't know if there's going to be a bidding war among those 6 teams, but you would have to believe 2, 3, 4 of those teams are at least investigating this pretty thoroughly about what it would cost to move up. Now, I didn't do the research for all those teams I mentioned, but let's just say the Rams, because that would be the shortest move, right, for them to make that move. Would you do it for pick 36 and their early pick in the 3rd round? Would you make that move?
Absolutely, in a heartbeat. You mean to tell me that the Steelers could move back 4 spots in the 2nd round and then recoup a 3rd round pick? Sign me up.
Okay, Rams don't have a 4th round pick. That's why I brought that up, and they do have 2 compensatory selections at the end of the 5th round. So I don't think the Steelers would be into it for just 5th round selections and just accumulating mid-round picks. I don't know what that gets you. The Lions, I think, have similar draft capital. There's a need there. Do you want to sort of get a guy in place in case Jared Goff cools off a little bit? Now, that would be a big move up for the Lions. They would probably have to pay a lot more than what the Rams would. But teams that want quarterbacks and have a high grade on Levis, I think would be intrigued by that move. So I think Omar Khan, believe me, he's taking calls already. We're taping this, in the 9 o'clock hour on Friday morning. He's taking calls now. He'll be taking calls rest of the day. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a trade in place if they get bowled over by the offer, say by late morning, early afternoon. I don't know when we would hear about it, but if they get bowled over by an offer, boom, take it, accumulate those picks, preferably still on day 2. So you get picks in round 2 and round 3. I think, I don't want to say it's a no-brainer because they very well could want a center or Joey Porter. But I think you have to think long and hard about it, because not only do you need a corner, you need a slot corner, you need an edge, you need a defensive lineman. There's still some holes to fill on this roster. And by trading pick number 120 yesterday, I don't know if you're going to be able to address all of those issues in this draft if you don't do that.
I'm right with you. And listen, the idea of just getting the guys in front of you, that is a classic move, and there's nothing wrong with that traditionally. But you're right; they could use youth and exploit a deep class. That I think that you mentioned those tight end is still a possibility. I even really like the idea of Darnell Washington if he could last until 49. Michael Mayer wasn't picked, and to me, it was Dalton Kincaid, Michael Mayer, Darnell Washington. Those were my top 3 tight ends in this draft class. And then you could still get other guys later on who like Schumacher out of Michigan, Musgrave out of Oregon State. Those type of guys, they'd be fine even later, like the 3rd round. But Darnell Washington has freakish measurables. And with Mayer there still on the board now in the 2nd round, if he gives you at least a little bit of protection where he's like, you know what, we did want to add another receiving threat / blocking threat to our offense, but we can probably hope that if there's another team looking at tight ends, there's only one other such team between where we pick in the early part of the second round to the middle part of the second round, and you can get Darnell Washington there. And I know that give them 2 Georgia players to start, but I don't think that the Eagles are anyone that covers the Eagles right now is complaining, because they continue to just draft Georgia dudes on Georgia dudes on Georgia dudes, and that's a big part of what I think is building with their youth movement. So, Ray, I'm right with you. Trade down if you get the right value. But I think that Omar Khan, he did a great job. I never thought the Steelers would get a high second round pick, let alone the first second round pick for Chase Claypool, when we were talking about that back in like October and November.
Yeah.
Who knows? He might be able to pull off another crazy steal of a trade here that gets the Steelers more day 2 value.
And you would think it would almost have to be somewhere between 33 and 40, right? Because when you trade down, you don't want to trade down 17 spots, because you want an idea of who's going to be there. But if you trade down 7 spots, 10 spots, and you have a list of guys that you know that you're going to be able to grab, and then you still know about that depth, I think that makes all the sense in the world. So, swap a second-round pick, 32 for anywhere from 33 through 40, and then try to get another third-round pick in return. And if you look at the trade value chart, those teams that will be doing that might think that's overpaying. But, hey, you're going to have to get a quarterback. Sometimes you got to pay when you want to get that future quarterback.
Now, here's the interesting prospect with the Lions here, and let's stick with them for a second. They are at 34. The Cardinals are 33. The Steelers are 32. The Lions wouldn't necessarily need to get ahead of the Cardinals because they're not drafting a quarterback, but maybe the Rams are trying to trade into that spot. Maybe you said the Seahawks, the Raiders, the Titans. Maybe your selling point is like, look, you might want to wait until you pick, or might even just trade up with the Cardinals, but these other teams are calling us and giving us a good price. If you want that pick, like you said, the Lions don't have a 3rd or a 4th round pick. They have 2 5th-round picks, but they do have 3 seconds. They pick at 34, they pick at 48, they pick at 55. What would you say if the Lions, they didn't call and gave you 34, but they gave you 48 and 55? So now you have 3 second-round draft picks and on top of your 3rd rounder. Is that too far back if you're getting another second rounder with it? Or would you be willing to take that drop down from 32 to what would it be, 48, which is the pick right before your other second round pick?
Yeah, that's 22 picks, and
that's a lot.
You pretty much know Avila and John Michael Schmitz would be off the board. Bunch of your corner targets might be off the board. I wouldn't want to do that. I know there's great depth in this draft, but assuming that you do have higher grades on players, 32 through 40 than you do 41 through 61. I wouldn't do it. Now, hey, listen, they might have all those guys with similar grades, and maybe in that regard, it would be worth doing it. But to me, when you're trading and you're trading down 22 picks, I don't think that would be enough return.
Okay, so let's say that they trade back with 34. Maybe if you're the Steelers, maybe you could offer them extra compensation to get another one of those second round picks, because, or maybe they're just that aggressive. Let's also wipe this off the board. Not all teams go by the book here, because just the Lions themselves, they had the 6th overall pick. They could have selected Christian Gonzalez. They could have selected, they could have selected Will Levis back then. They could have selected so many players. They traded out of that spot, and at 12th overall, and I don't know if you saw the video of the Lions war room when their board fell to them at that spot. They selected Jahmyr Gibbs, the small Alabama running back, who was the 2nd running back off the board. Bijan Robinson was gone at 8. 2 running backs went at 12, and I think everyone was kind of like, huh? I didn't see that. I did not have Jahmyr Gibbs. At best, I had him going 28 to the Bengals at the end of the 1st round, let alone a top 12 pick. And then with their 18th overall pick, they took Jack Campbell, who I don't think anybody was slotting as a mid-1st rounder, maybe at best a late 1st rounder. But you look at that, and I'm like, man, some of these teams, they might do something crazy because they did something crazy already.
You never know. And how about this, Chris? Would you trade 32 and 80 for 34 and 55? Would you do that?
Yep, I'd do that. You telling me I'm moving down 2 spots in the 2nd round to move up Quick math.
And you have three second round picks, and then you don't draft again until round 7. So now you're once again, you're not having as many picks, but you're getting more premium picks, presumably if you have higher grades on guys who are in your top 50, or top 55. So that's another scenario to maybe kick around here.
Man. Point is, the Steelers have so many different ways that they could attack this, and so many different players who I think would be very good fits. Omar Khan, Pittsburgh Steelers, they're cooking. I think that they have done a really good job setting them. We said going into this process, how they handle free agency, they set themselves up very well for how they can handle the first round. They handled the first round, I think, on both of our pages, and include what we do. I don't think I'd include Brian in this because he even predicted as well. And with his last mock draft, the Steelers would go get Broderick Jones with a trade up. I think all of us agree this was a win of a first round with how they handled it. Now they set themselves up to win the second round. We'll see how they win the second round here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. This has been the North Shore Drive podcast. Remember, you can download this podcast on your favorite podcasting app. You can watch this show on YouTube, but there will be a live stream on our YouTube page when the second round opens back up tonight. Adam Bittner did a great job. We ran a 3-hour show that you could have clicked in and clicked out with. We probably got you the picks. If you were watching, some people were complaining about this, like, hey, man, you're getting the picks before the TV is, because we're following social media, so we're seeing the reporters who have the inside track across the league, and we're getting notes on who teams are taking before they're being announced on television. So if you want to check us out with a show that's going to be sponsored by the Acrisure Fan Advantage, come back here tonight when the second round open. When does the second round open tonight? I don't know the exact time yet.
7 o'clock, and then I think it ends at 11 o'clock.
There you go. 7 to 11. We will have you covered here on the second and third rounds of the draft. Get here fast, because the Steelers having the 32nd overall pick, they've been on the clock basically already, for 10, 11 hours. So they're probably going to make their move, whether it's a trade or a signing, fairly quickly. So do get in here and do that. Ray, thanks so much for joining me here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Again, find us on YouTube and your favorite podcasting apps. We'll be back. We'll have stuff all throughout this weekend covering what happens at the NFL draft. But of course, this show, the North Shore Drive podcast, we'll be back Monday recapping all of it. But get all of that great coverage here with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com for all our written work, and of course, all our podcasting apps and YouTube for all the shows. Back with you very soon throughout this weekend, keeping you updated with the Pittsburgh Steelers updates on the NFL draft. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.